Welcome to Automated Testing in a Nutshell. I did notice on the door, it's actually got the old name of How Things Never Break. That was sort of the name that Claris gave it. And I had to ring them and say, well, yeah, I can't say they're never going to break, all right? We need to do something about that. But I'm going to try to give you some really good ideas, some tips and tricks. We're going to get a little bit technical and a little bit, talking about money and things like that. So back in 2021, David Wallinson was doing a thesis on creating the DevOps tool for FileMaker. He surveyed a whole lot of people and found that 10% of those people actually did some sort of automated testing in their FileMaker solutions. Now, David went on to create the Devon tool. If you haven't seen that, check it out. But 10%, I actually thought that was pretty high. So can I have a quick show of hands? Who does automated testing in their FileMaker solutions at least once? And what have we got in the room? Maybe 60 people? Yeah, that was 2 hands. So that's, 5% maybe. Okay. Do you do automated testing in other systems? If you're familiar with any other, like JavaScript or C or anything like that? Just a quick show of hands. Yeah. Yeah, cool. So you know what I'm talking about. Look, I am going to go right back to basics today. So we'll start out, we're going to talk some benefits of what we're doing. I'm quite sure you're all already here. You obviously see that there's going to be some benefit to this, so that's a great sign. I'll get technical. We'll have a look at writing tests. I've put together a framework called FM Test that is freely available to download. It's all open source. And that's going to help us test these things. It is just custom functions and a couple of scripts. I've tried to keep it as simple as possible for you guys to utilize. Well, sorry, not for you guys to utilize, for me to utilize, but you can use it as well. We'll come back around into some tips. I'm not going to cover too many tips because really it comes down to tips about programming in FileMaker in general. Koji has a session later on today. That would be helpful. I think Josh Ormond did one this morning, which is probably along similar lines of just different ways to program to make life easier for yourself. And that's all relevant here as well. And then finally, we'll come back to, is it worth it for you? In the mid-2000s, I started as the production manager at a theatre in Melbourne. It was, I managed about 30 casual technicians through lighting, sound, and things like that. And I had to write up the roster every week in Excel. I had no concept no visual representations of what was going on in the theatre, except for the giant, the calendar on the wall, and then tape and Sharpie. I'm sure you've all seen those in the past. That was what we were doing. That was to manage about somewhere between 80 and 100 clients a year across 200 to 300 performances. Like, we needed a better way. So I brought FileMaker in and I started building a system. And among quite a few other bits and pieces, we eventually got it off the ground. But I would be, I'd be sitting in the office and I'd be making a few changes, and then Natalie, who was one of our lighting operators. Now, Natalie, her full-time job was as the lead developer for a football tipping software company. Now, I mean, I'm from Australia, especially Melbourne. Football, for me, is very different to football to you and wherever else, but it's the same concept. And she firmly believed that testing code was so important, and her code very rarely broke. So she would say to me, when I'm scratching my head going, oh, I've broken this thing, and she says, well, where's your testing? Where's your unit tests, your regression tests? And I would say, what's that? So that's where I'm going to start today. Regression. We've all been there. We find a bug. We're pretty proud that we found it. Cool, put it in production. And then might be an hour later, might be 3 weeks later, and somebody calls up and says, hey, but now this is broken, right? And that's not great when you're constantly in that cycle of fixing something and breaking something else. So we want to be able to automatically test these things. Now, a few of you put up your hands and said, well, I do testing in other things, why not do it in FileMaker as well? And this is what I used to think up until a few years ago, until it dawned on me that it's actually not that hard. We're just going to use scripts. But why not? If I'm in C, I'm going to use C. If I'm in Python, I'm going to use Python, and so on and so forth. We're in FileMaker. Let's use FileMaker to do our testing. Now, when I first had this conversation with Natalie, it was, you want me to write code to test my code? Yeah, it's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to write code to test our code. It's the only way to automate our tests. So we're going to get quite a few benefits out of doing this. I've just picked 5 of some of my favourites to quickly talk about now. The first one being that we're going to detect the bugs early. We're not going to be putting them in production. It's not 100%. We're not going to have no bugs at all, but we can capture most of them, which is going to make our software stable. This is what we want. I mean, I imagine that most people here, we're not working for companies with thousands and thousands of users, who can just spend money on testing and on user acceptance testing and all that sort of stuff. We're talking about smaller companies, some even, one person and that's it. Maybe 20 or 30 is fairly common. But we still want the software to be stable for them, because if it's not, they're going to lose confidence in us. A nice byproduct of testing, which it's kind of hard to describe this one, but you're just going to start writing neater code. It's going to be easier to understand, along with these other sessions that talk about these different ways of doing code. When we start testing, we have to write code a slightly different way. And Korn actually talked a little bit about that yesterday in his DevOps session. We're going to consider the edge cases. So a little while ago, it was a FileMaker at FM Better form that I was working on, and it has about 100 questions on it, something like that. And we had to make some changes. They'd asked for a dozen changes, and one of the changes was take a multiple choice checkbox, turn it into a radio button, so that they can only choose one. Among the other changes, we did that, and we did a couple of tests, all good. We put it into the staging server, and they did their user acceptance testing and said, yep, all good, but we all know our users are terrible testers anyway. And it wasn't until 2 or 3 weeks later, and we start getting reports that FileMaker is timing out when the form is being submitted. Well, what's going on? It was only sometimes. It was one of those sometimes errors that are awful. It took hours and hours and hours to go through and work out that it was this one question that I'd changed to the checkbox. It turns out there was a custom function called JSON array to list, and it had a while loop in it to go through the JSON array. But it wasn't an array going into that custom function anymore. It was a single block of text. And so we just went through and did its 50,000 iterations until it timed out. And we weren't getting a response. It was literally a day's work to work that out. I've been using this script for 5 years. We didn't even think to look there. But if I had spent just 10 minutes writing some tests 5 years ago, I would have saved myself hours and hours, like a day's work later on. And of course, confidence in your changes. For you as a developer, for your clients, there is nothing worse than putting buggy code out to our clients, no matter if that's a one-person show or whether it's 500 people. We do not want 500 people unable to work because of a bug that we introduced. That's going to drop confidence. I mean, can you imagine that? 500 people can't work. What does that cost the company? That's big bickies. Who's going to pay for that? I made the mistake, but you guys didn't test it properly. So, it's this real grey area. So let's just avoid it. Let's just not be there. So really what I'm talking about is we're going to have this massive return on investment. It's literally immeasurable. Immeasurable in the sense that we can't actually measure it. And also it's going to be a lot. But if you don't write tests and then you have problems, okay, you've got problems. But if you write the tests, you might spend hours and hours and hours writing tests and have no problems for years. Was that because the tests are good, or is it just because you had no problems? Like, you can't measure it, unfortunately. But inherently, we can say, yes, you are going to save an absolute bucket load of time. Let's get a little bit technical. Let's talk about how we're going to do this. So firstly, we've got a custom function that's just going to add two numbers together, right? The most simple test that I could possibly think of is just to use an if statement. Does it work? Doesn't it? Show me a custom dialog. Of course, once we get into doing lots of tests, this is going to be useless. We don't want to be clicking OK all the time. So we're going to use the FM test framework. So we'll make it a little bit more complicated so we can see it. This is an intentionally complicated statement, but we're just going to abbreviate Claris Engage, and we're going to have 4 letters. But because there's not enough words, we're going to start using lowercase letters. Here's the script, the custom function that does that. Of course, one of the problems with while loop is it's hard to understand. And I even look at, I wrote this and I struggle to sort of read it. Even though it's nicely formatted, I have to really think about it. This is where testing is going to help us. So using FileMaker test, or FM test, I've just highlighted the basic custom function. This is the most simple custom function there is there. And we just use set variable and then use this. Firstly, we're just going to have a sentence about what we're going to test. Then we've got the value, or the result of whatever it is we're testing. And then we've got the value that we expected. So in this case, I've got a description, which is I've got Claris Engage FileMaker Conference, and I want 3 letters. It's the result of, or the value is the result of the abbreviate custom function. I mean, this could be a variable, it could be a field, it could be anything that you put in here. It's just a result. And finally, I'm expecting it to equal CEF. Let's run it and see what happens. So we get this this is just a global field showing us an output of FM test, and I can see that it's passed. It's green on the screen. Doesn't really matter anything else, but I've got my description there, and I know it passed. Now we can extend on that, and we can start adding in more tests. So in this case, I'm just taking one word away at a time. It's very quick to do that. I mean, I sort of showed you in video there just by pasting, but it really didn't take me long to create those. And again, those 3, they passed. I can see them on the screen in a split second. Let's go again. This time, it's the same thing. We're taking one word away, but I'm looking for 5 letters instead of 3. And now we have a problem. Very quickly, I've got red on the screen. That's bad. So now I can go and figure out what's wrong. Why didn't that work? And of course, I have no idea how it's calculated that to be RGC. If you can work out this abbreviation, let me know. I'd love to have a solution. I never got further than this. We can also add in, let me check. Yes, that is where we're up to. Yes, we can add in just a little bit of fluff around this. This is sort of FM test, just to initialize that this is a testing script and that we're going to finish up. And now we get this nice summary at the bottom of what's going on. So now I don't even need to look through. If I've got thousands of things going on there, all I need to do is look at the bottom and then go back and work out what's wrong. Now that's just 6 things here. Now hopefully you guys are sort of starting to see that is now there forever. And I can keep building on that. I can have hundreds of tests and assertions here. So these are actually assertions. And just have them go on and on and on. And then as I go back and I try to change this custom function to make it work with that failed 5-letter abbreviation, I can also confirm that it also works with those other 5 there, and it's only going to take me a split second. I don't have to go back and check. I don't have to use the data viewer. I never have to use the data viewer with this method. So unit tests. This is where things get a little bit tricky just about definitions. So a unit test is a very, very small, we're testing our small calculations, our small scripts that do one very specific thing. As in, these scripts, if you're familiar with the term modular scripting, like we're going to have JSON in, JSON out, and in fact, we're not even going to touch data. Really, with a unit test, we're not even going to look at our records. We shouldn't be. It's FileMaker, like we're going to sometimes. That's just the reality of the situation. But your JSON in and your JSON out is all you need to test this when you do those sorts of things. I mean, we saw it with a custom function. All I needed to do was run the custom function. So we want to run our scripts in that similar way. Integration tests build on this and we go bigger. So now we're testing our functionality. This is probably more where most of you are going to do more work, just because of the way that FileMaker works. So this is our, well, like I've said there, we're taking an order and we're going to turn it into an invoice. So there's a lot of small moving parts in there to make that happen. You could write that as one big script. I know I've done that in the past. But really, we want to break that down into the smaller parts so that we can unit test it as well. The tricky thing about integration tests is we have to set them up because we need test data. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to layout, new record, and I'm going to create the records that I need in order to start testing. Now, when I say integration test, I'm not talking about reaching out to an API and bringing it back. That's integration. This is just the term we use is integration test because we're working with multiple things. We also need to set that data. So it's going to be a new record, and then I'm going to set a whole lot of fields so that I know my starting point. Then I'm going to run my functions. Then I'm going to test it and make sure that that's done what I want it to do. Integration tests are very essential to making sure that your programs work as you've designed them to. That doesn't mean that we can just ignore unit tests. We still should be doing our unit tests on our small, tiny chunks of code, pretty much because integration tests take substantially longer to write. So we're going to have less of them in our system. And unit tests are going to tell us exactly where the problem is, much better than an integration test is. And of course, we can't go the other way. We can't just do unit tests and not integration tests, because things just don't work sometimes. Here is a payroll script. It's working out. These guys could work from anywhere 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is the single most complicated enterprise bargaining agreement or conditions that they work under that I've ever seen. And I've seen some complex ones. So we can see here, this is just for one state in Australia. Of the 4 states that they operate in, the rules are different. So I have to have different ones for each of those. This is the this is the test script that goes on and runs through it. The first thing I did was I've got another script at the top that creates the records that I need. It creates about 20 records for me to test this across various different tables. I just wanted to pause it here. Because it's just custom functions, we can just string them together with ampersand. We don't have to go set variable, set variable, set variable. We can just string the whole thing together. fmtest has a describe method at the top there. That's so that I know what I'm testing. I'm defining the test, and then I've got my assertions after it. What's going to be in this test? Most of them are equals. The last one is just make sure that it is actually empty. So we can go on. We could have as many of those as we want through this whole thing. But as we go down, you'll see that this is not a small script, right? This took a substantial amount of time for me to put together. And this is just testing one of the states, not all of them. But let's have a look at what happens here. Now we're starting to get some real things going on here. And thankfully, everything passed. I just have to look at the summary at the bottom. No problems, all green, no red. Now I'm laughing. When it comes to doing a release and things like that, we want to make sure that we're testing everything that we can. I mean, in particular, this test took 7.5 seconds. Sorry, excuse me. This test took just 7.5 seconds. It tested 18 different scenarios or 18 different tests with 85 different assertions. And it did that in 7.5 seconds. That would have taken me an hour, maybe more, to do. And I can just do this over and over and over and over again. And the only reason it took 7.5 seconds is because I called the script to make it display it on the screen. So it's also doing a refresh every single time, which we don't have to do if we don't want to. Now, when we get to the, doing a release to our clients, we want to test not just the one thing we've been working on. Ideally, we want to test the entire thing or the entire chunk that we've been working on. So we have a thing called test suites. And that's where we put a whole lot of these tests together into one great big thing. And it's, really it's as simple as just perform script, perform script, perform script. Let's take a look at this. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's going to go through, it's now gone to the next set of rules that it's testing. And eventually we'll start to see a bit of red. And this is where I start to go, oh man, now I've got some work to do. I'm just going to skip through to the end. And so in this test suite, we've got 85 tests were performed, 85 different scenarios that I tested, the pay conditions that these people are under. Just 7 of them failed, and 8 of the assertions within those. So it's pretty much one assertion failed per those 7 tests. Then we can look back and go, okay, what failed? What do I need to fix? Now, sometimes this gives us, well, in fact, often it gives us where we need to be looking and what we need to do. So a truck driver who works the night before a public holiday should be paid as if they worked the public holiday because they're going to be sleeping all day the next day. But in this case, we can see that my code has paid them, we've got 0 hours in the night section and 8 hours in the public, and 8 for the public holiday. It should equal 8 for the public holiday, and it should equal 0 for the night, but the night got 8. The public holiday got empty. So I know what I have to do. Now, the reason that this is still in the code is because that's not as simple as it sounds. And I was able to have a discussion with the payroll officers and say, look, I can spend another 10 hours trying to fix this. Or, for the very, very rare occasion that this happens, twice a year, you just need to be aware that you're going to have to fix it manually. But to be able to go back to the client and say that, I know this does not work. It's not something that they're going to come to me later and go, oh my God, we haven't paid people properly. So I talked to Natalie about testing, and I went home that weekend and I sat down at my computer with the intention of adding in 2 new features for the next week's work that my team had been asking for. And I spent the entire weekend writing tests. It was like probably 10 hours a day. My family were like, what are you doing? It's like, oh, I'm testing, I've got to write these tests. And then I've got to get to the features, so I need to get my tests done. I don't know, I just kind of, that's what it felt like it needed to happen. And in the end, I didn't get any of those features done. It was just all the testing, writing up the tests, learning how to do that. And I went back into the office on the Monday, and I said to Natalie, like, this is crazy. I've spent hours now, like 2 days, and I've got nothing to show. I've done no software development. And she says, testing is software development. It's part of the process. It's not this separate thing that you do later. It's just part of the process. It verifies that your code is working over and over and over again. So this is why we need to do it. I'll go into just some tips to make things testable. So each script should do one thing. What do I mean by one thing? We could argue about that forever. What is one thing? Is the save as PDF script step one thing? I mean, it is, but that's not really what I'm talking about. There's going to be a few other script steps around that. That could be one thing, like saving a document could be one thing. Uploading to the invoicing system could be one thing. Even like creating a record could be one thing, because you might have to go new record and then do a few other things around that. So really we want code that is going to be not repeating itself. It's going to be easily testable because we're going to be using it over and over. Separating business logic from the user interface, not the data separation model. Like this is just a way of programming. Most of my scripts have JSON in, JSON out, unless it's for a button. I will have the button that says perform script with the inputs it needs. Then the button script reads the JSON output and says, did I pass, did that succeed or did it fail? It's had to do a new, or delete a record and it can't delete the record because the record's in use or something like that. And it comes back and says, no, I couldn't do that, and it puts the error on the screen. One of the beauties of programming like this is that I can now call that business logic from wherever I like. It doesn't have to be a button. I can call it from the data API using OData or whatever. Any other system, I could use an FMP script, the FMP URL script to call it. I could use the server schedules. And usually I write it in such a way that it doesn't matter whether I'm local or on the server. I can just call it on the server. I will pass an ID. And that business logic script will then go and find the thing that I'm looking for. It does take longer to do that, but in today's day and age, computers are fast enough that we can do that. Oh, and of course, we can then call it from the test script and get the result. Like, that's the point. Calculated fields and custom functions where we cannot test it. So, conditional formatting, security rules. We can't actually run that code in any way except to log in as that user and see whether or not it worked. So we want to take that code away and put it somewhere that we can test it. Custom functions is my favorite. I was really excited to see that we are getting folders in custom functions now, because I have a lot of custom functions in my solutions so that I can test that calculation much more easily. And now I can put it in a nice folder where I can tuck it away. Is there any other places that you guys can think of that we wouldn't be able to test code in FileMaker or test a calculation? I've freaked you all out about testing now. You're thinking, how am I gonna? I thought this was gonna be easy. You're supposed to solve all my problems. You're just making me work.
So button bars, like layout elements, all the calculations on layout elements. I don't know if you already have.
Actually, yes. That's actually a good one. I hadn't thought of that. If you've got a calculation on the name of a button bar, yeah. Maybe using get layout object attribute. You might be able to grab it using the content flag. But yeah, that is a good one though.
Well, web viewers as well, because there's no backwards. So if you're using JavaScript in web viewers, you can't look back and get the context. You have to pass that in. That's a bit of a challenge as well.
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually intentionally leaving out JavaScript at this stage to try and keep it simple. There's a whole nother level we need to go to, but yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, happy to chat about it later on though, yeah.
Now you'd have a layout calculation as well, right? You probably would want to use your get layout object context.
Yeah, again, it's the same thing. Yeah, get layout object attribute. Yes, yep. Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, just some comments on the two situations you guys posted. You can apply kind of deal with a few situations that are kind of similar when it comes to adding like calculations to either high conditions or maybe on the tooltip or stuff like that, or names on your menu bars. What you can do is apply the same logic that you're applying to the scripts, make a custom function that takes input, and then just put the functionality instead of referencing the fields. Then you can test those functions.
Exactly right.
For the web viewers, what we've done as well is we build our web viewer code outside of FileMaker, and we run with our test you need. And if you use lab or something, just minimize the code and then put it into like a calculated field or something like that, and you can put that into the web viewer. That'll render it out, and you can build your testing and your development outside of FileMaker. That can help out as well.
So I'm kind of supposed to repeat things for the recording, but there was actually a lot to unpack there. So apologies if you're listening to this on the audio recording.
Good to hear.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. This is one of my favorites. Right? Write tests before you write the code. This is something that I only started adopting about 12 months ago. Even though Natalie taught it to me some 15, 20 years ago. This is where the first thing I'm going to do if I'm writing, well, I'll say a custom function. I'm going to go and create that custom function with the inputs I think it needs. And I'm just going to have it exit with 0 or something like that, or even empty would be fine. Then I'm going to go and write a test script calling that custom function, and I'm going to put in maybe just maybe one test or two tests and a couple of assertions to make that work based on the thing that I need it to do or the instructions I've been given. And then I'll hit play. And it's going to fail. But I'm verifying that the script fails. That's what I need to see. Now I'm going to go back into my custom function and I'm going to start making that work. One piece by piece. Might be even one assertion at a time. One little test is all I need. And then I'll come back and I'll say, oh yes, that works now. I've got 1 green and 10 red things. Cool, next red thing, make it do that. Usually I end up doing a couple at a time because that's straightforward. And then eventually you get to a point where you run your test script and everything goes green. And you go, yes, it works. It does feel great when you get to that point. So, and then I'll go and I'll write some more tests as I need to, depending on how complicated the script is. It's called test-driven development. If you want to know more about that, just punch it into Google. There is, you don't need FileMaker content to learn how to do that. You can just, there's so much stuff out there and great techniques, even ways to practice doing it. The Roman numerals is one of my favorites. So if you do it, check out the Roman numerals. They call it a kata, where you practice the way you're coding. All right, the last form of testing we're going to look at today. I've called it user interface testing. The other term you'll hear is end-to-end testing. I've called it user interface testing because it's actually quite different to the other tests. But this is all about, from the user's point of view, from start to finish of a process. So we need, in order to do this, we need remote control of the user interface. We need to physically be moving the mouse around, clicking buttons, seeing things come up, responding to those questions, or whatever it happens to be. So we can do this in 2 ways. Thankfully, we can use the Monkey Bread software plugin. There is functions to move the mouse around in there. Or we can use a third-party application, of which there are heaps. Today I'm going to look at Ask UI, just to show you something. The reason I've picked Ask UI is because it's cross-platform between Mac and Windows, and it works exactly the same. There's actually very few that run on Mac desktop. Here's a script that I wrote using the Monkey Bread technique. All this does is, I forgot to sort of put a shot of what it's actually doing, but it's one field on the screen. I'm changing that field from Mick to Gertrude, and then I'm pushing the submit button, which pops up a card window. And then I'm pushing cancel. So I want to verify that then reverts the record from Gertrude back to Mick. It's really quite simple. You wouldn't do a user interface test or end-to-end test this small. It'd be much, much bigger. But that's all this is doing. It's come in at about, 17 lines, something like that, with the breaks in there. I haven't used the Monkey Bread software plugin directly. This is, where is it? Somewhere in the middle there, it's called fmt.click. So I've actually abstracted that into a custom function, because what it does is use the get bounds, which is an internal FileMaker call, to get the bounds of whatever it is you're trying to click on, and then it uses Monkey Bread software to move the mouse to the middle of that and click. Unfortunately, I don't have any demos of this working. I thought it was kind of silly because I've videoed all my stuff anyway, and then I'm just going to show you a video of automation. But if you do want to see this stuff working, come and see me somewhere, come and find me. I've got my laptop with me, and I'll show you through how a lot of this actually works. Ask UI is a completely third-party option. This is using the Jest framework on top of JavaScript, or on top of Node.js. The script has actually come in a little bit shorter, but if you don't know JavaScript or Node or anything like that, this is probably completely alien. It's a whole new thing for you to go about learning. But it works really, really well. What Ask UI actually does is takes a snapshot of your entire screen, and then you tell it, click on this field, or click the thing that is next to these words, whatever you describe. And then it finds it. It uses AI to work out what's on the screen, and then it moves the mouse off to wherever you need it to be. Of course, the problem is it's taking a snapshot of your entire screen. So you have to be really careful. I run dual 49-inch widescreens, like this big, sitting on top of each other, right? And yeah, it takes about a minute, just every mouse call, unless I make that smaller. And yeah, make sure there's lots of white or black on my screen. So there's quite a bit to think about with that one. Looking at both of these options kind of side by side, Monkey Bread, obviously it's FileMaker. You guys all know FileMaker. It's going to be relatively easy for you to take that pathway. And we just use the FM test framework to test. If we have something that, I know we don't really use it a lot anymore, but like the send mail script step, where it opens up the local mail program, at that point, FileMaker stops running. So if you're trying to test and then you've got that send mail script step, which is part of the broader, start to finish process that you're testing, then this isn't going to work, because you then have to manually go in and trigger something, which is exactly what we want to avoid. We don't want to be doing this manually at all. Ask UI is great because we don't have that problem. It works completely across the entire screen. And it's designed for UI testing. Like, that's its job. It's to automate your desktop for testing. But of course, we have additional tools that are required. Just trying to get Node up and running on your system, if you're not familiar with how that works, you've got a couple of days, probably, okay? It's not that simple. And movements can be slow. Alison?
When you're doing your interface testing, are you watching the mouse move around? So like if windows are flashing unexpectedly, or if there are other things, like it might complete the task, but other UI elements aren't working. So it's automated, but you're still watching it execute the task?
Yeah, so to repeat the question is really, to summarize, is are we watching what is going on the screen, so that we can essentially verify that there's no artifacts happening on the screen? And the answer is yes and no. You don't have to watch the screen. That's the point. We're automating it. But you can watch the screen. With Ask UI, it actually has a built-in record functionality. So as soon as you start the test, and this could be running on a dummy server somewhere, something that is just there for you to do tests, and it will record the entire testing process that it sees. So you can then go back and watch it if you want to, but you don't have to. If we're actually going to write, we can't write a test to capture an artifact on the screen or something like that. That would be, yeah, trying to capture that moment in time. Yeah, we're just sort of verifying from start to finish. Our three testing types sitting next together. Unit tests, really easy to write, really quick, really fast. Really, there's no reason that you guys shouldn't be able to go away now and just write a quick unit test. Integration tests, this is going to take more practice and a little bit more understanding and a little bit more work because you do have to do your setups. And of course, don't forget to tear it down at the end. Otherwise, you'll end up with millions of testing records in your solution. And then finally, user interface tests. User interface tests take a lot longer to put together. So really what we end up with is this kind of inverted pyramid in our thing. We should have lots of unit tests because they're easy and there's really no excuse for not writing them. Integration tests take longer, but they give us a better indication that everything works. So we should have some in there. And then finally, user interface tests. I mean, you don't have to do them at all, really, but one or two just as an overall verification to save that effort from your human testers might be worth it. But again, that's going to be up to you whether it is worth it or not because they do take quite a while. So lots of tests in our system equals good. Do we test everything? Natalie would say yes, we sure do. That some custom function at the start, I actually asked her directly about that when I said I was talking about this. And she said, yeah, there's going to be tests on that. I said, but why? I'm just adding two numbers together. She said, yeah, now you're adding two numbers together. But tomorrow you might be also, maybe it's doing minuses. Maybe in 5 years that some custom function is called math custom function. It's just morphed from one thing to another. So if you start with your tests, you know that you're adding the two numbers works together. Natalie's not here, and I hope that she isn't going to watch the recording. I wouldn't test it, all right? Sorry, Nat. You've got to work out what is actually worth testing for you, and we will talk about that shortly. But to tell another story, I was working on a fairly big system, again, in the construction industry, where they've got they call it the Future Works board. So it's basically a calendar in a web viewer, and it displays the hundreds of jobs they've got coming up, where all their machines are, and they project it up onto the wall so that they can see it in their offices. And we were doing an update. We hadn't changed anything in that system. But we were doing an update from development into production. It was a migration, using the migration assistant. I think we were using AutoFMS at the time. And we always do some checks afterwards. So we turn the system off at about 7 p.m. And then we do the update. And then we've got a thing that we do, the post-implementation checks, just to make sure that everything has come back online, that we don't have any problems. There's a lot of moving parts in this system. FileMaker sits in the middle of it. And I noticed when I checked the FutureWorks board that only 2 days of jobs were coming up, and then there was nothing after that. I'm like, no, hang on, there's a lot more jobs in this system than what I'm seeing here. Why am I not getting that? I also get a call from the manager of that division who says, I know you guys are doing the update, so I just logged in to check and I can't see the jobs. So, okay, great. It's now 9 p.m. and I've already got the client ringing me saying I can't see stuff. So for the next few hours, we had to sit there and work it out. They've got an in-house developer as well. So the in-house developer was texting me saying, yep, I'm looking at it as well. So I think it was somewhere around 11:30 at night. We finally worked it out. Well, actually, the in-house developer did. It turns out that a few weeks beforehand, he had made some changes to the caching system. So basically, to prevent, because there's a lot of jobs, and that's all in JSON, we take all the job data and put it into the JSON only if something is changed. So that way, whenever somebody loads the calendar, because there's hundreds of employees, it's not having to generate that data on the server. It just generates it once, and then it fetches it off a field. And it turns out that caching system had broken. And because the in-house developer had been experimenting and hadn't quite put it back to what it was beforehand. Now, we've got no automated tests on this system, obviously, right? This is why it didn't work. But had there been, the in-house developer would have known straight away because he would have run the tests to go, oh yeah, I broke some things and now it fails. We would have had a unit test on the caching system. That's what we should have, but we don't. It was written years ago, like probably 8 or 9 years ago now, I think. No, not that far, but. So he didn't realise there was a problem. I didn't realise there was a problem when I sent it into production because we ran our tests beforehand, they all passed. But there was nothing covering this, which is why we do a visual check on it, a manual check. So that was hours, that was myself, the in-house developer working well after hours. We're into overtime. Like, who's paying for this time for us? This is money. But this is what I'm saying. There's this point where you have to go, yes, I need tests, no, I don't. Only you can decide where those tests are. All I can do is tell you that I've had so many situations where things have failed and I go, oh my God, I wish I had tests. So here we go. Is it actually worth it? Look, I mean, you're still all in the room. I don't think I've seen anybody actually walk out. So that's great. So it must be something worth it here for you. So writing tests today saves time later. Like that's the simple statement. It's this immeasurable amount of time later. A couple of questions that you can ask yourself about whether or not it's actually worth it. Without even this, if I've got one person running FileMaker Pro on their desktop and I TeamViewer in to help them, I'm probably not going to have tests in there. Because if something goes wrong, they're just going to ring me and I'll just TeamViewer in and fix it. It's not a big deal. If I've got, something important, something critical though, medical systems, I've put some cool icons there, payroll systems, safety systems, government, although government gets it wrong all the time, so, we need more tests there. Any of those things where things are critical, you should just be testing as a matter of course. These things cannot fail. You cannot get it to production. And we all know that our users are the worst testers ever. Lots of users. I mentioned earlier, if you've got, 100 people, 500 people, and they can't work because of a bug you introduced, that's a lot of money that can be lost, right? We don't want to be having these questions and these discussions. And also, you just lose that confidence. It's completely gone when you have bugs in a system like that. Sorry, in bugs for that many people. Complicated scripts. So the payroll script was an example. Exceedingly complicated. It goes 5 or 6 if statements deep, and there's all sorts of calculations within that we didn't even see as it was scrolling through. Multiple developers. Well, as I just said, if you're working with somebody else, you both need a way to verify that the code is still working. We can't rely on, I did something and I changed this, and because if we have to do that all day, why do we have multiple developers? We need to be able to work independently. And of course, probably why you're all here, you just want to stop finding bugs and just make it work. So this is how we go about it. I've practiced this a few times, and usually I run to about an hour, but I've actually come to the end 10 minutes shy, which is great. Although it probably means I've been talking too fast, so I do apologise if that's the case. It's a lot to take in. There's probably some new ideas here. Some of you were probably sort of looking for this golden solution of how do I fix this? Unfortunately, we still need to work, but we've got some methods here that we can use. As I say, FM Test is free to download. Grab it, and just try it, Even just try using the show custom dialog method or whatever else. But 3 things I want you to take away. The word regression, right? It's this real thing. It is a problem. We need to remember that it's there, and so we want to be testing to prevent it. Confidence in your changes for you and for your users. And the last one is my favourite. If this is the only thing that you remember, writing tests is software development. It is not something separate. Don't think about it that way. Just start doing it. And you can do this. You don't have to go back and do this on a new solution. You can do this in your existing ones and just pick one pain point that you're constantly testing and go, yeah, okay, I'm going to start testing in that one and start getting used to it. And in time, it's all about practice. Once you start doing it, you'll pick it up. Any questions, guys? Any further ones?
Can you define the difference between test and assertion?
Yes, sorry, I didn't make that very clear. The question is, can I define the difference between a test and an assertion? Look, the reality is, it doesn't matter, these are just words. A test is a group of assertions, is probably the easiest way to define it. So we're going to set up a scenario and we're going to test that scenario and we're going to use assertions to test that overall. Yeah.
Does this have to be integrated into the database you're testing, or could you have a separate database that touches other systems and test them?
Yeah, sure. So the question is, does it need to be integrated or part of the same database that you're working on, or can it be separate? Yeah, it can be separate, but you will find that it needs to be wherever the thing that you are testing is. So if you can call the script, separately from the other file or wherever else it is, yeah, sure, you can do that. Personally, I find it easier. FM test comes as an add-on. Like, it literally takes seconds to add to your systems. So I actually find that if I've got multiple files, I've got FM test set up in all of them. It's just easier. But yes, no, absolutely you can. Yes, yep.
I don't know if it's a silly question, but do you always have to know what the answer should be in order to ask something?
Yeah, so for the recording, yeah. Do you have to know what the answer is before you start testing something? That's right? Yeah. Yes. You do need to know the answer. If you don't, and it's absolutely not a silly question, because I mean, I asked Natalie a similar question, I'm quite sure. If you don't know what the answer is going to be, why are you programming it now? You need to go and find out what that thing is supposed to be doing before you write a line of code, in my opinion. So, yes, you do need to know the answer. And yeah, like it's probably, I would say, if you're going to test it, that might sort of encourage you to go and talk to whoever you need to talk to, or find that system, like the payroll I was working on, where I have 10 pages of enterprise bargaining agreement to go through and work it out. Even reading that, I didn't know a lot of the answers. It's all written there, but it's jargon. So I had to talk to a lot of people before I could even start to grasp that.
But just to that question though, if you're comparing a value in a field with a value in another field, the answer is always going to change, but the comparison is actually what you're after.
I like this one. This is a good question. If we're comparing, when we're doing tests, if we're comparing the value in a field to another field, it's going to change. We're not comparing it to another field. Our expected value is always a constant. It is a number, it is text. So to that end, maybe if I can sort of stretch to where I think you might be going, we can't always know the answer. I mean, and it extends off yours as well. Sometimes we can't get a constant because there's no way to know. It's coming back in different ways. But you know that you might know that there should be a value. You don't know what the value is going to be, but you know that there should be one and it should not be empty. So I'll just test is not empty. Yeah. So yeah, that's actually a really good point.
Is not a question mark.
Yeah, is not question mark. Exactly right. Yeah. And in fact, I've got that exact thing in a lot of my tests. Yeah. It might be testing a JSON object to make sure that a key exists. We don't care what the value of that is, or we can't predict what the value is going to be, but we can know that the key actually exists. So we just test as far as we can. Anyone else?
Where do you
balance between having error handling in the code itself versus testing it. Like, I imagine a test would say, oh, I should test that right in the code so it never will produce the wrong result. Is that the intended result?
Sorry, just rephrase.
If you have a piece of code and you set a test that says the result should be this, and then you say, oh, it doesn't do that, doesn't that inform you to say, I'm going to rewrite the code so that it doesn't produce that result? I'm going to put error checking or conditional stuff. Do you find that happens in your code, your testing leads you to bulletproof the code itself? That's what the process is?
Yeah, to rephrase, during testing, sometimes you'll pick up an error, so then you'll go back and rewrite the code to put in error checks to prevent that error or make sure that things don't happen. And the answer is absolutely yes, all the time. So my JSON array to list example, there was no error check there to make sure that it was actually having an array input. So now it does. I've written a test and yeah, I know that works. Yes, so absolutely, yeah, you'll do more error checking, yeah. Probably more to the point on that, you'll find the spots where you need error checking. Yeah, because you'll get some sort of funny value back. You'll be testing the edge cases and go, oh, hang on, what happens if this? Yeah. Anyone else? We got like 2 minutes left, something like that? Yes?
Is there any way that this can test for performance? Like if you have, you have a unstored calculation or something you're doing and it's really slow, is there any way you can test that to see what's more efficient?
Yeah, so testing, can we test for performance? Yes, absolutely, we can test for performance. For time reasons, I didn't talk about that today. There are some really cool tools out there that do that, and I can't think of them off the top of my head. Honza from...
Bench.
Yeah, FM Bench, that's the one, yes. Yeah, fantastic tool for performance testing. Up the back?
Yeah, I was just wondering, do you often add a sample record in your data set when you're running your tests so that if you have a complex test and you need a record to produce something that you know it's...
Yeah, so yeah, with the integration tests, absolutely. So the first step of integration testing, when we're having to refer to our data anyway, is I'm going to go to layout, new record, call the primary key test one, something like that. Go to the next layout and create the child records I need. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and that's a big reason why integration testing takes a lot longer, because there's this whole setup that we need to do, especially if it's a big thing. Yeah.
Would it handle the scenario where you're using an on-screen timer and a user doesn't respond before maybe the on-screen timer kicks them back to a menu? If it's looking for an object, like with Monkey Bread software or something, can it handle a scenario like that?
With the user interface testing and the end-to-end testing, yes. Yeah. Yeah, so pretty much the way it works is it gets to the end, and if the thing that you're looking for isn't there, it'll sit and wait a little bit longer, and it'll try again, and eventually it'll say, no, the thing you're looking for isn't there, and it'll fail. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Please do, as everybody's saying, jump in and rate the session. It's really good to have really bad feedback so that I know what I need to fix for next time. And if you want to know more, just, please come talk to me, come and find me, Yep, all good.